Why should we be thankful for fathers, thankful for dads? And as I talk about this, I'm not only talking about the one that may be in your home, or the one that was in your home, or the one that should have been in your home, the one that left your home, the one who forsook your home. I'm not talking about just all of those types of things, but also among God's people. Because the Bible even describes older men as being like fathers to other brethren. And as a father to the brethren, there are certain roles and responsibilities they have as well. And when these individual men are taking care of their individual families the way that God intended to be, that's naturally going to be one of those things that influences and shows a great example to other men within the congregation. And so I would ask some of you younger men, who is it that you're looking up to? And not just the father that hopefully you have in your home, but also those in this congregation, those among the brotherhood who are like fathers to you and the influence that they might have upon your life. So that's what we're going to be looking at, because without proper guidance, and I think this is something that you're seeing more and more of, at least it seems to me, is that without proper guidance, it's like someone who's trying to find their way out of a wilderness, but he doesn't have a compass and he doesn't have a sense of direction or even a sense of purpose. And they end up wandering and just going in circles throughout all of their lives. And it's not supposed to be that way, and that's not the way that God wants it to be either. That men have been given this role from the very, very beginning of time, when God created man in his own image. And he gave him a role and responsibility in the garden. And when he gave him a spouse to be his helpmeet as he goes through the way of life. And as sin even comes into the world and has to point out once again that the role of the man is to be that leader, to be the one who guides, to be the one who protects, and to be the one who provides, that is something that is sorely missing in our society. And it's something that men seem to not be taking seriously as often as they should. But God bless those Christian men that I have seen in my life and that I know that you've seen in yours, that they will take care of their families, they will guide their families, they will protect their families, they will be there for their families, and no matter what happens in life, they are always going to be that steadfast, that rock that's in their home that protects that home against all the dangers that the world tries to throw at it, especially Satan. God bless you for that. And I've seen a lot of that as I've been a Christian. So some of the things that we know that a father is supposed to do, one of the things that obviously from the very beginning, we ought to be able to thank our dads for providing, for being the one who takes care of that family and its physical needs. That we know from the very, very beginning, and this was before the fall, this was before sin had entered the world, that before sin had entered the world, God made a garden, and he put the man in the garden to take care of it. There was a lesson and there was a job that man was supposed to be about doing, that God wanted him doing, and it had nothing to do with sinfulness. It had nothing to do with hardship. It had nothing to do with a curse. It was work, and that was good, and that was perfect. God created man for the purpose of working, for having a role, for having responsibilities, for knowing what it was like to tend to the thing that God had created, the earth itself, and to be able to do it in such a way that it would bring honor and glory to the image that he was created in. He put man in the garden to tend to it. And this is a lesson that seems to transcend, it's not just something that permeates in the hearts and minds of Christians, but even the world around us. You know, there's a scathing rebuke in 1 Timothy 5 and verse 8, that if a man will not take care of his own, especially those of his own household, the Bible says that he's worse than an infidel. And you look at that statement and say, so why does it say worse than an infidel? Here's why: because even an infidel knows he should take care of his family. And he doesn't have regard for the things of God. But even he knows he's supposed to take care of his family, that's his role, that is his responsibility. And so as a Christian, obviously you should know that. And so Paul has to tell the brethren in 2 Thessalonians 3 and verse 10 that if a man doesn't work, he doesn't eat. Because that man sees that, well, you know what, the Lord's coming at any moment. That's what they seem to believe. He's coming back at any moment, so why should I go to work? If I was to tell you Jesus is coming this coming Friday, would you go to work tomorrow? Tuesday? Wednesday? I think a lot of us say, no, I'm not going. Why? I'm not going to see my paycheck. So what's the point? The point is work. And here Paul is telling the brethren, you don't know when the Lord is coming back. You don't know that. And so you still need to be about the job that's been given to you. And it's not just about the paycheck. But man, one of the things that we need to understand is that by working, by being busy, by doing those things that provide for our family, the paycheck most of the time is not the most important thing. And it's not the dollar amount that's on the paycheck that's the most important thing. But it's the fact that you're going to do whatever it takes to take care of your family, to provide for them. And so whether you're out of work and you're trying to find it, or you buy a lawnmower to go cut some grass somewhere, or whatever it may be, it's one of those things that you show to your family. Look, we may not have the best of things. We may not have the riches that others do, but guess what? You're not going to go hungry. I will never let that happen to my family. You're not going to be in need of the basic necessities of life, because we are going to do what it takes to take care of our family. You know, this is a very hard time for a lot of people because of the different things that's going on in the world, and no fault of any of our brethren that are losing their jobs constantly in this society right now because of what's going on. And that puts a hard and difficult strain upon fathers, especially upon fathers, because that is my family. How am I going to take care of them, protect them, and to provide for them? But I know this as well, that they're going to do whatever it takes. They're going to do everything within their power to make sure that they're taken care of. So today, thank your dad for having that type of attitude. And plus, thank your dad for this. He never seems to show it. He never seems to show how stressed out he may be and how difficult a time this may be for us. Thank him for that, because that shows the strength of the character that he has and his trust in his God that he serves. And so thank your dad also for fighting for your family. There's an interesting passage in John 17. And you remember in John 17, this is Jesus' prayer before he's going to go to the cross and to suffer for the sins of mankind, to spend the days in the grave. He's about to go through a very, very difficult time. And he knows that his time, just with his apostles in general, is drawing to a conclusion, especially at this particular moment on this particular night. And as Jesus is praying first for himself and then for his apostles and then for all of mankind, in the middle of that, when he's praying for his apostles, he makes this statement in John 17 and verse 12. While I was with them, Jesus talking about his apostles, that while I was with them in the world, I kept them in your name. Those whom you gave me, I have kept. And none of them is lost except the son of perdition, that the scriptures might be fulfilled. Jesus understood and Jesus took responsibility that God had blessed him. The Father had blessed Jesus with these apostles. Jesus says, you gave them to me. And while they were with me, we were in the midst of this world that we are living in. And Jesus was in the midst of a very, very hostile world. And yet, even in the midst of that hostile world, Jesus was able to protect his apostles. That even in the midst of a world that had taken the things of God and perverted them and started teaching things that were contrary to the Word of God, that their traditions and their ways of thinking had become much more greater than what it was that God had actually commanded. And even in the midst of that world, and these disciples who grew up in that world, and these disciples who had been taught in this world to think and to feel the same way that the world around them thought and felt, Jesus was still able to keep them in the midst of that, and I lost none of them. Jesus was fighting. When Jesus was teaching his disciples to pray, he was fighting for those disciples. When Jesus taught them how to go into the different cities and to preach that the kingdom was coming, Jesus was protecting and he was fighting for those disciples. When Jesus rebuked those disciples for the way in which they thought they should bring down fire and brimstone from heaven to destroy a city, Jesus was fighting for those disciples. Over and over and over again, Jesus was fighting to conquer sin and Satan. But he was doing specifically here in verse 12, speaking of his own that God had blessed him with. Psalm 127 talks about a man's household and how he is blessed when he has a quiver full of these children that would be in his home. God has entrusted us men with fighting for our families, that we are the ones who stand guard. We are the ones who are fighting the tide of this world and the things that are going on in it and the false doctrines that may be promoted. 2 Corinthians 10, verses 3 through 5, that you've heard so many times, tells us that the weapons of our warfare are not carnal. We don't use the weapons of this world. We use the same weapons that Jesus used. And these are the same kind of weapons that will pull down strongholds. These are the same kind of weapons that will take captive each and every one of our own minds and bring them into subjection to obedience to Christ. It defeats every argument that a person may bring. Because your father is one who doesn't trust in that armor that someone in the world says, this is how you defeat that. This is how you go against that. You fight fire with fire. No, you don't do that. You fight it with putting on the whole armor of God instead. And it's Ephesians 6:10 through 18. You can imagine your father being in that armor when he fights those battles. But again, let me remind you of this. You probably do not see, especially as a child in that home, and maybe even as a wife in that home, many times you never see the battle that your father or your husband is fighting. And the reason being is because men, we need to take a special interest in passages like Philippians 2:14 through 17, where it tells us that we're to do all things without murmuring and complaining. That we do these things that we might be shining as lights in the midst of a crooked and perverse generation. See, fathers have to fight a lot of battles. But the way in which many times we fight them is this. We stand between you and the storm. We stand between you and the enemy. The leader is the one who is out front, and he's leading. He's not standing in the back and guiding, pointing, directing. He's out in front and he's leading. And since he's out front leading, he's the first one to take that first bullet. It hits him first. Too many men in our society, and I'm just talking about society in general, are whiners and complainers. It's pretty blunt, I know. And I'm sorry if that's offensive, but it's true. Too many men see themselves as being kings, but a king like Ahab. Naboth won't let me have his vineyard. And so they go on their bed and they lie down and they pout about it. And then who steps up to take the lead? The wife comes in and says, oh, that's okay, honey. That's okay. You want me to call your mama so she can bring you some chicken soup, make you feel better? Is that not true, though? God bless you, godly men. That when you stand up and you fight for your family, you're like in Matthew 7, where it talks about the house that's built on the rock. It's built on a solid foundation. And when the winds come and the waves and all that horrible storm comes upon that home, you're out front. And you're protecting your family against that. That wave hits you. That wind hits you. And it never topples your home because you're out front. And you're protecting your home against those things. And you don't go back in the house and start murmuring and complaining and grumbling about all these things that brings your family down, brings discontent within your family, brings turmoil and division within your family, that causes them to doubt and not have the kind of faith that they're supposed to have. Fathers, we have the role to instill that kind of faith in our family, that God provides, that God protects, and God is our rock. And there's nothing going to destroy this home because God gave me a role. God gave me a responsibility, and I take it seriously. And the reason I take it seriously is I have the armor of God. I have the weapons of his warfare. And what can man do to me? And so, no, we don't get upset. We don't get all in a turmoil over these things. Yes, the storm is loud outside, but guess what? It's outside. That's what fathers do. And that's why we're supposed to be thankful for them and the protection that they have for our homes and the warfare that they wage. Like Noah in Hebrews 11 in verse 6, that Noah was a man who was told by God that there was a storm coming and a flood coming. And here's Noah, how you're going to save yourself and your family. Go out here and build an ark. Really? Some have supposed that maybe there wasn't rain at this time. I don't know if there was or not. I tend to believe that there was, but I don't know. I have no idea. But I do know this, there was never a flood that engulfed the entire planet. There was never a flood coming because of the wrath of God. I do know that. And this is how God was going to make a very vivid dividing line. And so Noah's told to do something that really doesn't seem to make a whole lot of sense. But Noah protected his family by trusting in what God said. And the whole world is going to be destroyed. The entire world is going to be destroyed. Doesn't it feel like from time to time, dads, that the whole world is just coming apart at the seams? You know, I saw a meme this past week that said, "Oh, look, July's coming." And it was a freight train that was on fire. Because 2020 is just the year that just keeps on giving, it seems like. The whole world seems to be coming apart at the seams. Build an ark, dads. Build an ark. Have faith in what God said. How did God tell you to build your family? Do it that way. It doesn't matter what happens in the world. And guess what? It may be just you and your kids and your wife that get in that ark. But would you be thankful that your wife and your kids followed you into that ark that you built? Dad is doing a weird thing. He's not acting the same way that other people are. He's spending all these years, Peter says, as a preacher of righteousness. Not only is he just doing it, but he's telling other people, get in the ark with us. Has Dad lost his mind? How is this going to help? It helps because it was built by faith. And it helps because it was built by a man, as Genesis says, a man who had found grace in the sight of God. Thank your dad for building that place of protection from the storm, from guarding you from those waves and winds that are beating upon the home. Thank your dad for that. Thank him for doing it in such a way that you did not even know what he's been going through. And believe me as well, as I said earlier, this is not just about the dad that's in your home, but there are brethren within congregations, and there are deacons, and there are elders, and there are preachers within congregations, that they fight countless battles that others do not hear about. And the reason they do that is so that this house that is built by our God is not torn apart by it. And you never know about it. Men, be that kind of man. Men, teach your children to be that kind of man, which means as they're growing up, don't protect them against all the harshness that they're going to encounter in their lives, but train them so that they may face the encounters that you are facing in your life. But don't put that burden that you're bearing right now on their shoulders that are too young, too immature, and not broad enough to carry that weight. Because if you do, they will be crushed beneath it. That's why God gave you that role. It's a God-given role. It's an honorable role. And it's one that brings glory to our God when men fulfill it. Thank your dads for that. And thank the dads that you have in the faith for doing that very thing as well. Thank them for being a priest also. I hesitated about using that word because a lot of times when we see it, it has kind of a strange connotation to it. But really that is what the Bible describes all of us as Christians as being. But the dad has a special role. He's supposed to bring his children up in the nurture and the admonition of the Lord, Ephesians 6 and verse 4. That he's to do so in such a way that it does not create frustration within that child. That he's to do it in such a way that the child, it's easy for that child to then show him honor and respect, but more importantly, that he develops a love and affection for his God. The word that's used there for nurture, to bring them up in the nurture and the admonition of the Lord. It's not just about the admonition that, look, you've been told not to do that thing, now stop doing that thing. But it's also about the nurture of the Lord. And that word nurture that's used there has the idea of developing an appetite. And I've always loved that illustration for that term. Develop within them an appetite, a curiosity, a desire for it. It's like when you open a candy bar and that child may not have ever seen a candy bar before, but they see the way that you enjoy it. And so what do they want? They want it. And then when they taste it, what do they taste? This was good. I like this. That's why the Bible talks about if you have tasted that the Lord is gracious, desire that pure milk of the word. That's what we're developing within them, that nurturing that is there. The priests of the Old Testament, as they continued into the future, and especially during the time of Christ, had forgotten that role that they had. that as they stood between the people of the nation and God to offer up sacrifices and praises to God on behalf of the people, and to make appeasement for the sins of the people by offering the sacrifices on their behalf, first for himself and then for the people, he had a special role and responsibility. But it wasn't just so that he might take the sacrifice from the person of Israel and then offer it to God, and that was all that it was. It was just about doing that duty and I'm done. But it was about bridging that gap. And that's why Jesus is that perfect high priest that we've talked about, that we've studied about. That's why he is that perfect one who makes intercession for us, because he always lives to do so. What do I need to do to make sure that I bridge that gap between my child and my God? Because at this point in his life, it may be that I'm the only God in his life because he hasn't matured to a point where he even understands and can understand who God is. What can I do to bridge that gap? What can I do for my teenage child that has decided I don't want to have anything to do with God anymore? That I don't believe this stuff about the faith? Because really when I look at brethren, I don't see them as being any different from the people of the world. What am I supposed to do as a dad? And what can I do as a dad to step in there and, as a priest would do, be able to bridge that gap between them and God? To be able to pray on their behalf and with them and make intercession for them between them and their God. To be as Moses was when he stood between God and the people, and God says, "Step aside that I might destroy them all because of their sin." And Moses makes intercession for the people. To be that kind of person, to have that kind of boldness. But you will never do it if you do not see your role as being a priest. Someone who holds in high regard to the commandments and the judgments and the statutes of our God and the ordinances of our God. If you're just saying, look, God is mad with you, just start coming to services and maybe he won't be so mad at you anymore. That's not what a priest does. It's not the role of a priest. I know that God has told me that this is the reaction I'm supposed to have to you for turning your back on him. But I'm not going to do that because that would just be mean. That would just be cruel. You will never bridge that gap. Your role as a priest is before your role as a father. And you will never fulfill your role as a father until the role of a priest is accomplished. Teaching them right from wrong, guiding them in the way that is right, fulfilling the duty and responsibility that God has given to you as such is so important. I was told this morning that one of our sisters interviewed their young child about, what is daddy's job? His job is to say no. And I thought that was funny, and it made its way to the sermon even though I heard it this morning. But the reason being is because sometimes it does seem that way. And we do have to have the courage to do that. But think about this. In Joshua chapter 3, I would encourage you to read Joshua chapter 3 and chapter 4 today. And think about your fathers as you see these two chapters. Joshua chapters 3 and 4. And if you remember in Joshua that what is happening right now is that Joshua has taken over the role of leadership among the people of God. And I'm just going to kind of sum up these two chapters. But Joshua is taking over the role of leadership. And one of the things that God says at the beginning of chapter 3 and several other times as well is that he's going to begin to establish the name of Joshua as being God's appointed leader over the people. And the way that this is going to happen is this, is that there's this great walled city, Jericho, that we've studied about in recent months. And they spied out the city, and now it's time to take possession of the city. And God does it in a very unusual way by having the people march around the city and remember all that. And remember the story about Rahab the harlot and how she is saved from the destruction that comes upon the city. But in chapter 3, what happens is that the Ark of the Covenant is going to go before the people. And God says, I want this ark to go before the people. And I want all the other people to stand back from that ark. But when that ark begins to move, I want everyone to follow it. And God says, I want priests. I want the priests to be out there carrying that ark. Now, the ark is estimated to weigh about 2,000 pounds during this time. Okay? So these men have a tremendous weight upon their shoulders. What if that was your dad? Think about that being your dad. One of the one who goes out there and picks up that heavy ark represents God's presence, his promises, his covenant, and as heavy as it is, he picks it up on his shoulders. And then these priests are supposed to go down to the Jordan River. And the Jordan swells its banks at this time, the scriptures point out. And those priests are supposed to start walking out there and start walking out to that water. And as soon as their feet touch that water, way off in the distance, it stops flowing and starts filling up like a giant wall, because your dad touched that water carrying the ark of God. And then your dad carrying that ark goes out there into the middle of the Jordan that's now dried up. And everybody comes walking by. Remember what it was like when you were young? Oh, my dad could beat up Superman. My dad carried the Ark of the Covenant across that great river. Can you imagine that? Being that kind of a father, that kind of a dad? They're told to take these stones, take a man from each tribe, and have him take a stone that represents his tribe. And when they get to the other side of the Jordan, Joshua takes these stones from these men who've been selected from their tribes among all the nation of Israel, and he builds up this monument of stones to where in later generations, when the sons come by and they say to their father, "What do these stones mean?" You can tell them about the day that we had these priests that went out there and touched their toes to the edge of the water, and the water's dried up. And we marched across on dry ground. And then when the priest came to the other side, that water was released and it went back to normal. And God was announcing the presence of his people by using these dads who were priests and had been selected to carry a heavy burden and to represent his people. Through that, God also established, I have a leader that I have selected, and it's Joshua, which coincidentally is the old name for Jesus, really, Jeshua. God has selected a leader, and that leader is Jesus. And fathers, when we act like priests, when we pick up that heavy burden, when we're willing to throw it on our shoulders, when we're willing to march toward that river, knowing that God's going to dry it up and I'm going to get to the other side, there's nothing going to stand between me and the goal that God's given me, because God said that he would move it. And that I can stand there in that place and I can have my son and I can have my grandson and my great-grandson and I can have my other brothers and sisters in Christ walk by and say, that's my dad. That's my father. That's who I'm looking to. Because you know why I'm looking to him? Because he points me to Christ, the true leader, the real leader, the significant leader that God himself has chosen. And that's why we ought to be setting an example and be thankful for our fathers and our dads for setting that right example. Paul said in 1 Corinthians 11 and verse 1, that imitate me as I imitate Christ. And so much as I am a reflection of who Jesus Christ is, I am worthy of your imitation. The day that there is a scar, the day that there is a smearing of that image, I'm no longer capable of having that role. But so much as I imitate Christ, imitate me and do the things that you've seen in me. Paul told the Corinthian brethren also in chapter 4 of the same letter that though you may have thousands, many instructors, yet you do not have many fathers. And Paul pointed to the fact that he himself was a father among them because he had begotten them in the faith. Genesis 18 and verse 19, God had selected Abraham because Abraham was a man of character. And Abraham was a man that was going to walk by faith. And in Genesis 18 and verse 19, God says, for I have known him in order that he may command his children and his household after him, that they keep the way of the Lord to do righteousness and justice, that the Lord may bring to Abraham what he has spoken to him. In Romans 4 and verse 11, it says that he is the father of all the faithful. Abraham had flaws. Abraham made mistakes. Abraham did things that we say, why would you do something like that? But God still said about Abraham, I know him. And he's the kind of man that even though he has flaws, even though he makes mistakes, even though he's done things that are inappropriate, Abraham is a man who's going to guide his household in a way that is right. that he's going to try his best and do his best to always walk by faith. And because of that, all of us today are called children of Abraham, because that's how he's ordered his household. The reason that we can enjoy salvation today is because Abraham was a good father to his family. Because Abraham was a good father to his family. And he walked by faith. And so Proverbs 22 that talks about train up a child in the way that he should go and he will not soon depart from it. Guide your family like Abraham. And how many generations have come behind Abraham to us now? And what are we still called because of our faith in Jesus Christ? Children of Abraham, children of the faith. What a great blessing that is. And fathers, that's the kind of legacy that we can leave to our children. But we do have to be that example. We have to set the tone. We have to begin the walk. We have to start the life. And so no matter where you're at this morning, maybe you haven't been that kind of father. You can start that today. There may be things in the past that you've done that those things can't be undone. But what can you do from this day forward? Thank your dad today if he has been that kind of dad. Thank your dad for the good things that he has done that set the example and set the tone. I didn't grow up in a household that was always governed by things of God. Most of my life was not. But I can remember a time in my life when my dad, I was already an adult, but my dad had gotten serious about coming back to the Lord. He quit school in the 6th grade. He stuck around to the 9th, but he quit in the 6th, according to what he always said. And so he had a very, very difficult time reading. But the little congregation that he was attending and trying to help with needed men to be able to take part in a lot of different things. And my dad learned to read a lot better by sitting down and opening up his Bible than he ever did in school. And the reason being is because he was serious about the things of God. And that was an example I will never let go of. That's what we're supposed to do. That's the example we're supposed to set. And that's what God has called upon all of us to be about doing. So be the example of Bible study. Be the example of prayer. Be the example of what it means to love your spouse, what it means to love your children. Be the example of all these things that we've talked about this morning. And God will bless your home because that's his promise. And that's the role that he's given to you. So that's the question I'm going to leave with you this morning is, have you told your dad thank you? Or have you even told a dad thank you this morning? As Paul said, you may have many instructors, but you don't have many fathers. Thank one of them today, and I believe it'll be a blessing to you. So if you're subject to the invitation, if you need to repent of something, if there's something that we can do to help you, to restore you, to strengthen you, whatever that may be, please let us know as together we stand and sing this song.